Thanks for tuning in. This is TJ Murphy, and you are listening to another episode of Adventurous Entrepreneurs. My guest today is Norman Wolfe, founder and CEO of Quantum Leaders. Norman is a luminary in business transformation, dedicating his career to redefining how organizations operate. With a rich history as a CEO, corporate director, and advisor, he has catalyzed growth and innovation in numerous sectors. Norman's groundbreaking work, The Living Organization, encapsulates his revolutionary approach that marries business efficacy with the human spirit. His consultancy, Quantum Leaders, pioneers this shift by focusing on creating environments that foster human dignity and creativity. Norman's insights are not only sought after by CEOs worldwide, but also deeply resonate with anyone aspiring to infuse soulful purpose back into their business practices. Just a few of the golden takeaways Norman and I talk about in this episode are guiding organizational transformations, a CEO's guide to personal and professional harmony, aligning life and work for fulfillment, and understanding context for lasting change. So, without further ado, this is me and Norman Wolfe. Welcome to the Adventurous Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, TJ Murphy. Since quitting my corporate 9-to-5 and starting a business while backpacking through Asia back in early 2017, I've had the privilege of learning from some incredibly adventurous entrepreneurs. Through these conversations and my own journey, I've learned that much like in life, entrepreneurship is an adventure. On this podcast, I explore the journeys of top-performing leaders in their fields. These wide-ranging conversations include tactical business advice, how I built this insights, lessons in leadership, life hacks, travel stories, favorite hobbies, and insights into living a purposeful and joy-filled life. Adventures await us, so let's dive in. Hey, Norman, welcome to Adventurous Entrepreneurs.
Hey, TJ, lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm very excited for the conversation. You've had an amazing journey and a lot of experiences that I want to dive into throughout this conversation. But let's start with a bit of background on your journey. Can you tell us a little bit about your story leading to you becoming the adventurous entrepreneur today? And was there like a defining moment that ultimately made you pivot from traditional business models to focus on the human spirit in organizations, which I know is a key pillar for you?
Wow. So my journey started like many people of my generation. Graduated university, went to work for Pratt & Whitney Aircraft, moved from there to another large corporation, Hewlett Packard, spent 15 years doing the corporate thing, climbing the corporate ladder, learning how to work in a large corporation, moving into the executive ranks. But in 1988, just around my 40th birthday, there was something about, well, two things were happening. The first is that the changes in Hewlett Packard that kind of gave clues to the shift from the iconic HP to the HP that went through all the troubles with Carly Fiorina and Mark Hurd and so forth. The second part of that was, I've been in the corporate world my whole life, and what's it like to swim in the great big ocean of entrepreneurialism? And so there was this thing inside of me that really wanted to jump out and figure out what that was about. And seeing the changes in HP, it just felt like the right time. And so I did. I just jumped. I often say I jumped into these great ocean of entrepreneurialism without even a life vest or any safety net. I had no idea what I was doing. I knew I had some real strong skills in leadership and organization. My career in HP was always taking over poor performing organizations, taking over organizations for which I did not grow up functionally within that organization. So I had to learn over the course of my career at HP some other skills than just being a technician who moved into management, so to speak. And that gave me a whole background of good business skills, good leadership skills, good people management skills, motivation skills. I figure a lot of small businesses don't have that background or experience. So why don't I offer my experience to them? And what do you do with that? You become a consultant. So
Yeah.
1988, I started consulting, and I've been doing it I'll say on and off for the most part, because there's been a number of times when I went back inside a corporation as a chief operating officer or president for an owner founder that needed some leadership talent to be there day to day, and I did that 2 or 3 times. But I've done so many things in the area of consulting, um, from turnarounds and mergers and acquisitions and strategy and business process improvement. You just sales training, marketing. I've just touched about so many aspects that I became more and more a advisor to CEOs, sort of the strategic mentor to CEOs who want to know how to be more effective at running a business. So that's what I've been doing. I'll tell you though, that first jump into the ocean was quite an experience.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I didn't know if I would survive. I had, but probably was about 13, maybe 12, 13 months of runway in terms of income that I had to start bringing in revenue. If I really started to eat peanut butter and jelly, I might be able to stretch it to 18 months.
Hmm.
But here I am over 35 years later, still doing it. So I did something right along the way.
Yeah, let's
And
dig into that a little bit. I mean, what early on when you took that dive into the great unknown without a life vest, as you said, what were some of the things that you, looking back, wish you had done differently, or was there one thing in particular that you stuck to and ultimately did help you get through that water and build your boat towards a thriving business?
That's a great question. I've reflected on that many times over the years. I'd say the thing that helped me the most, uh, that's sort of been a foundation to my whole career, is the idea that early on I learned, I like to say, being stupid is being really smart.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is I knew I didn't know things. And rather than having to be the person who's the expert,
Mm.
I was willing to be the person who was learning what I didn't know. And I think that more than anything has sustained me and helped me throughout my career. Um, I've always been a curious one, always seeking new knowledge, always pushing the envelope. I remember when I first started, I didn't even know how to write a consulting agreement. I didn't know how to price myself. I didn't know anything about that. So I joined a group of consultants. It was called Consultants Roundtable, and there was other consultants, and I'd ask a lot of stupid questions,
Hmm.
and then I wasn't stupid anymore, you know. So I think that notion of being willing to be stupid so you can get smart is really a theme that probably played out well in my life.
Yeah, that resonates deeply with my experience. You know, early on, I think my ego was the biggest enemy, thinking that, hey, I got to figure this all out. I got to go the hard way and learn these things through experience. But learning how to be curious and check your ego and ask questions, seek out guidance and
Yep.
mentorship, find a community of people that are all working towards the same common vision and goal. That's when you can really find the shortcuts and learn things at a much more rapid rate, to not be asking stupid questions anymore or move on to new stupid questions because you've started to develop the mastery on the foundational stuff.
That's exactly right. I guess as I'm listening to you, this a second idea came up for me that's also been a theme in my life, and that is, um, I'd like to call it following my heart. And what I mean by that is there's so many options we face. You know, as I'm learning all these things, some things I'm rejecting and some things I'm accepting. Now, what's causing that decision process? And what I've discovered, it's never really a rational decision process. Over the years, I've fine-tuned the ability to check in with something, you call it my deeper self, my higher self, my inner wisdom, my soul, my guide. I don't know, call it whatever you want.
Yeah.
Uh, but there's a part of us that if we allow ourselves, as you say, to give up the ego's need to be right and know everything and check in this kind of a feeling tone that I've learned to trust that says, this feels right. It's almost like there's like a clear bell that rings inside my body versus a dull thud, like, nah, I don't want to play that game, right? That's not for me. And it falls into everything from taking this client to leaving that client to doing this kind of contracting versus that kind of contracting versus this is how I'm going to price my business, or I'm pricing it too low, I'm pricing it too hard. A lot of those things are highly subjective, especially in the intangible world of selling consulting businesses, but it's true everywhere. So learning to follow your heart. People talk a lot today about knowing your purpose and following your purpose. Well, I take that back a step below that because most of us don't know why we're here. It took me over 45, 50 years to figure out what my calling in life, what my purpose in life was. Like I didn't have that to follow to make my decisions, but I did have some, call it inner guidance that said, I'm on track, I'm off track.
Yeah.
And the more I followed that, um, and the interesting thing is every time I ignored that guidance,
Yeah.
after the blow up of a marriage or the blow up of a client engagement, it's like, I knew this wasn't right.
I had a feeling.
I kind of felt it and I didn't listen.
Yeah.
And so that reinforced, hey, stupid, listen. Come on, dummy, pay attention to your inner guidance. So I
Yeah.
would say that's the second thing that really helped me a lot.
Yeah. It's amazing that it's true. Your gut feeling more often than not is what ends up playing out. I've had many experiences where my gut told me, we shouldn't work with this client, or
That's right.
we shouldn't go down this path. And sure enough, the gut was right. So there's definitely a skill set of learning to trust your intuition and your inner feeling. Sometimes, it's just that gut feeling.
Absolutely.
There may not be a solid reasoning behind it, but being
That's
able to
absolutely
take
true.
that and see it for what it is. All right, Norman. So let's bring things forward to what you're focused on today at Quantum Leaders. How do you help transform CEOs and leaders, and what's your process? Like what is a typical engagement look like for you these days?
That's a great question. So a lot of the work we do at Quantum Leaders is based on the very principles I was just describing, helping CEOs trust that inner guidance.
Yeah.
Let's face it, the CEO's world is probably one of the most complex positions anyone can hold. Any leader, whether it's a CEO or a department head, the difficulty of managing getting results done through people in an environment that's never stable. And you just can see how one challenge compounds into the other because you're dealing with a lot of moving parts. So what we've done is create a system that can identify the key leverages in those moving parts so you can get everything moving in the right way at the right time. And we often look at it as combining the hard side of business, very logical, very rational, with the soft side of business, which is anything but logical and rational.
Yeah.
Typical engagement, I don't think there is a
Yeah,
typical,
no such thing.
as you probably know. So we have a model that we follow mostly as a framework to guide us to apply that framework uniquely to each client. And the model goes like this. The purpose of the engagement is to help the leader take their organization on a journey from where they are to where they want to be. Part of when you go on a journey, any journey you go on requires preparation. Right? You're not going to go on a journey and forget to put gas in your car. And you're not going to go on a journey without having some idea of the route you're going to take. And you're not going to go on a journey without having the right level of equipment with you that you need and so forth. So we want to prepare the client for the journey. And that consists of a number of different pieces. One is, if you're going to go on a journey to create some impact in the world, you probably want to know things like, what is that impact I want to create? And to answer that, you probably want to know, why do we exist as an organization in the first place?
Mhm.
And how do we bring that purpose into practice? What, are we going to sell razors or razor blades? Are we going to be a consultant, or are we going to develop a training programs and be a training company? I mean, there's lots of different ways we can realize our purpose and make the impact we want. So knowing we call it the mission, the purpose, the mission, the impact we want to make. And also, since our model is based on seeing an organization as a living person, we ask the question, what's the character of this person? What kind of character do you want to be in the world you're going to be living in? So that's the first step. Then we want to know, what resources do you have to take on the journey? So that's an assessment phase. And then we want to know your business model. How are you going to sustain yourself? How are you going to feed yourself? How are you going to invest in things? So how are you going to make money, and how are you going to spend money, and what are the leverages for that? So business model. And then we take all of that and map out the roadmap. Okay, so now we're ready to go on the journey, right? Now in traditional language, that's called strategic planning. I hate that term because it's so overused. And I use the word roadmap and journey because it creates that notion of, this isn't logical and rational. We don't know what the plan is. We only know where we're starting from and our desired destination. And we have a sense of how we're going to start the journey. But that's about all we really know for sure. Because 2 months, 3 months into it, something's going to show up. Facebook is going to come out of nowhere and change the whole way we market things. I mean, you just don't know, right? So
Yeah.
we want to keep that attitude of, it's a journey, and we think we know how we're going to get there, but we really want to be open to discovering along the way. Just like my own life I described at the beginning.
Yeah.
Given that most leaders have been trained in running an organization as if it's a logical, rational machine that you can design and plug in the right components. And given our view is that it's not that, it's actually a living human person, that as a collective, it operates like people do because it's made up of people.
Yeah.
And the cells in the organism, the people are the cells of the living body called the organization. We believe that leaders need some new skills to facilitate their ability to guide and nurture and develop this living being, not design and optimize this machine. Different ways of thinking. So we have a whole series of training modules. One of them is learning to live from this, or make decisions, not only rationally and logically or ego-based, but being able to drop into that place where you can use inner guidance to make decisions. That's a
Mhm.
skill, and it's teachable skill. Um, Knowing that you're dealing with humans, you want to have the skill to not only communicate from a logical, rational place, but from a heartfelt, caring, loving place, because people respond better to that than logic, and right. So you need that skill. And given we're living in a highly uncertain world, having the ability to respond improvisationally would be useful.
Yeah.
And there's a whole body of knowledge of how to develop skills for improvisation. So we draw on that body of knowledge and teach what we call improv mindset. And so forth and so on. We've got a whole bunch of skills, including how do you develop people, how do you become leader as coach, and so forth. So there's the preparation phase, and then there's the training phase. And now we're ready to go on the journey. Now the fun begins. So
Set out.
the third part of our engagement structure is we call guided execution. And you can think of that as having two components. It's a coaching component where we're helping the leaders apply the principles they just learned in the training to daily life. Right. Okay, you got into this situation and you got into your head and your ego got in the way. Let's drop into the heart center. Let's draw on that wisdom and what might you do differently? And that's not easy for people to do. So having a guide and help, and we provide that. The other part of the guided execution is it's so easy to develop a roadmap and then get sidetracked.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I drove into this town and boy, this is really pretty. And I end up staying there for 5 months. And wait a minute, we're supposed to be going to the next town, right? It's really easy to get sidetracked, to get caught up in daily challenges. And I lose sight of we're on a journey. Let's keep moving forward. So a good part of the guided execution is to keep everybody focused. And the third part of it is challenges come up. We got to change the roadmap. And
Mm-hmm.
people tend to want to get stuck. I wrote this plan, I got to stick with it. And sometimes that's true. You don't want to get sidetracked. Other times it's no, we just learned some really important data. We should shift and change.
Yeah.
And how do you know that? Well, you know that by dropping into the heart center and you knowing what's true and what's not. So you're back into that skill set again. So we have three parts to what we call the living organization system, TLOS, which is preparation phase, which is preparing yourself for the journey, building your roadmap, the learning new skills phase, and then taking the journey and having a guide to help you through that, leading an organization from a new perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Typical engagement. Sometimes I just work with a client to help them identify what we call the strategic compass, the soulful purpose, the mission, the character, the impact of the future, and that's the end of the engagement.
Yeah.
Not often, but occasionally. Sometimes we just work on leadership skills, heart centering, leader as coach. How do you develop people effectively? What are the dynamics to getting people to change their belief systems so they behave differently? So we have various modules that we can just teach those as a standalone thing. The ideal client is one that hires us for the whole journey.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about your book, The Living Organization. You
Love to.
introduce, yeah, I did a little research, and in your book, you introduce the concept of activity, relationship, and context. And I'd imagine that kind of ties into the journey that we just described. But can you explain how these forces interact and why context specifically is the most significant?
So let me describe the three forces first. So activity, well, let me back up one step. Let me describe first how I came upon it. So around 2000, I began to focus strictly on strategy execution. After all these years, I realized that's really the game I played, right? Helping them
Mhm.
go from here to there. And strategy, statistically, organizations tend to, 70% of organizations fail in executing the strategy. That statistic has not moved for over 4 decades. We've been measuring it. No matter what we've done, no matter what new leadership styles that have come out, whatever books came out, nothing seems to change.
Yeah.
And that's what led me to question the concept of a paradigm, something I learned in the 70s by Joel Barker, which is really nothing more than the way we think about the world guides the way we make choices. And that's when I came up to realize that the way we think about organizations is a machine of production. And it's all logically constructed. But my experience in leading organizations, helping other leaders run organizations, is it's anything but logical and rational.
Yeah.
It's human, right? So then I asked the question, okay, how do we as people create outcomes? And I realized, well, there's certainly, we have to do stuff. We have to type a report. We have to measure and cut the wood if we're building cabinetry. I mean, whatever we're doing, there's going to be a doing phase to it.
Absolutely.
That's activity, what we do. Activity also covers all the logical, rational things we think of, like writing up a plan, having the measurements for how I know I'm going to be successful, having the goals and metrics and all that stuff. but human beings don't operate alone. And even if I'm just building a cabinet in my garage, I am interacting with my wife. And, I'm trying to please her and I'm trying to make sure that what we do. And so there's this whole aspect of relationships that happen in organizations and in people's lives in general. So that led, and relationships has this interesting dynamic that it can either feed my energy and give me an excitement and give me more energy to do my activity,
Yeah.
or it can detract and drain me, which lowers the amount of energy I'm going to put into my activity, even to the point of stopping completely. So activity is one element, and then the quality or nature of the relationship, the energy that's surrounding me, impacts the amount of energy I put into the activity. And then there's this third thing, context, which
Context.
is really an interesting one and is really, it's easy for me to understand, but it's hard to describe. I like to make it out as the underlying rules of engagement of my particular life. Sometimes I think of it as the operating system instruction of my life. More simply put, it's the belief system I have created about how to respond to events in my life that make me safe and or successful. If you think about how people live their lives, most of us don't think about what we do. We do things out of a semi-automatic response to an event.
Yep.
That's good. I mean, that's actually a good thing,
Yeah.
because
Keeps our
otherwise,
cognitive load
yeah,
lower,
I
less
mean,
decision
it
making.
puts it into muscle memory. It allows me, I don't have to think about it. And the typical example is learning to drive a car. When I first got behind the wheel, when I was 16, 17, I was like this.
White
It
knuckling.
took me about 3 months till I'm driving like this, right? I, and I'm driving down the road. Well, just the other day, I was driving down the road and like within 200 feet of the exit, I'm in the far left lane and I look, I gotta get over, right? What I was off in thought, something inside of me took over. I didn't think about it, but something let me know it was time to move over and you better do it now.
Mhm.
Most of the other time, I was just totally quote unquote unconscious. I wasn't really unconscious.
Yeah.
My conscious mind was focused on other things, and there was another part of me that was focused on the driving. That's the way we live our lives, and that's really a good thing because it is what makes us efficient, productive, effective, safe, and successful. Until my unconscious operating system instructions produces a result that's not what I want anymore. It might have been what I wanted when I was 16 or 25, but it's not what I want at 40 or 50. It might have been successful when I was in New York City, but it might not be successful living in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
So, but remember, these are now unconscious. So that collective belief system that I talked about, that's unconscious is what we call context. And why it's so important is think of it like this. We know if I want to change an outcome from A to X, I can't do the same behaviors and expect a different outcome. That's a classic statement. Right?
Yeah.
So we know we have to go from behaviors that are producing A to a different set of behaviors that are producing X. But if my behaviors are driven by my context, which are unconscious, just going and giving people a logical, rational explanation of why we should do X instead of A, therefore go ahead and change your behaviors, isn't going to get the behaviors changed unless you also understand the underlying context that's driving those behaviors and you change the context.
Mm.
So activity, relationship, context are the core key elements, and why context is so important. It's the unconscious, mostly unconscious instruction set that determines the behaviors, which determines the outcomes.
Yeah. So let's tie this into your work with clients and organizations. From an outsider's perspective, I'd imagine it's a lot easier for you to come in and see where there probably needs to be a context shift to get to where they want to go in their journey. Does a story come to mind where you were able to help a CEO or leader change the context within their organization that led to a remarkable outcome?
Yeah, a couple of them. I'll just share one for the sake of time. I was working with a um, technology company. They started off as a sole source supplier to the government, developing high-end, very sophisticated encryption algorithms for entities like NSA, NRO, the big security intelligence companies, right? They played in the crypto space before crypto was crypto.
Yeah.
They started off as a sole source supplier. So as a sole source supplier, their context evolved into what's most important is developing high-end sophisticated solutions. And since they didn't have competition or have to face competition, nor did they have to worry about budgets once they were selected, the engineers simply told the business development people, this is what it costs to develop the solution that's going to be the best solution for this client.
Hmm.
Fast forward a number of years, and they were very successful, and they grew tremendously. And as they grew, they started to attract bigger players who had more resources
Hmm.
into the same space. At the same time, the government was moving away from sole source supplier to commercial off-the-shelf acquisitions. For obvious reasons, they wanted to save money.
Yeah.
So the business development people would go out and find an opportunity, bring it back, get a quote from the engineers, and the engineers would do what they always did, give them a quote of developing the most elegant solution possible. Business development guys would go out and they'd find that they weren't anywhere near competitive with their other players in the market. So they were losing, I think they were winning about 10% of their bids. They went from like 100% to 10%. So what did they do? They brought in a very high-end consulting firm that specialized in government bid process. And they developed this whole bid process and white hats and red hats and black hats and reviews and structures and all of that. And I think they paid a couple $100,000 for it and implemented it. And the bid success rate went from 10% to 13%. Like it made no difference.
Yeah.
I was working with the CEO on the strategy element of it. And so he came to me and he says, I don't know what's going on. I said, well, let me talk to the engineers and the biz dev people. Let me find out what's going on from, their perspective and how they're taking to this and where the problem might lie. So I did a simple interview of the organization. And what I discovered was just what I told you, that the engineers viewed their sense of identity. Now remember, context is not only my instruction set of how I behave and respond, it's who I am as a person or as a collective person, such as the engineering department has a sense of identity. We only develop elegant solutions. It's not our job to worry about money.
Yeah.
And of course, when I talked to the business development folks, it was they were frustrated because they couldn't get them to understand we're in a competitive situation. So what I suggested to the CEO was we had to reframe that story about sense of identity. And we came up with it took us a while, but we came up with a kind of clever way to do it. We said, okay, you engineers pride yourself on creating elegant solutions. That's what makes you the best engineers in the market. And we said, any engineer can come up with an elegant solution
Hmm.
given infinite resources. But the really, really best engineers can develop an elegant solution within a constrained budget. Now, are you really, really the best engineers? Now, It took a while. That's the simple story behind it. It took a
Yeah.
number of interactions and conversations, um, and challenging them with each new quote. But within 6 months, they were back up to winning 70% of the quotes.
Wow.
That's
Just
context.
had to rally the troops.
But it's not just
Present
rally the
them.
truth. We had to change their inner belief system.
Yeah.
We had to change that underlying context. Now, when I tell the story, it sounds like simple, but you're talking about people's sense of identity, and they don't
Mhm.
give that up easily.
No,
It's a
definitely not.
experience of something inside of them dying. And so you have to deal with that. And we teach all of that in one of our modules called reframing context, because it's such a critical element to success. So
Yeah.
there's an example.
That's a great example. It's a great example. All right, Norman. So I want to transition a little bit before we close things out.
Sure.
And really the theme of this podcast is if we're entrepreneurs or even just, in a corporate setting or just a human being in general, one of the biggest hurdles that we all face is how do we do the things that we love most? How do we spend more time with our family? How do we do the things that bring us joy amidst all of the other things on our plate? And
Uh,
especially as an entrepreneur, those things are always on. So I always ask our guests, what does living a well-rounded life look like for you? Or how do you blend your business and your workload and still find time and that balance to be human and do the things that you need to fill yourself up and be present with your family, with your friends? How do you make it happen?
I'm gonna sound kind of like a broken record, I guess, but the truth of the matter is it goes back to being in the heart center. The inner guidance teaches me how to be in balance. What keeps us out of balance, and I remember going through this in my life. I woke up one day with feeling very awkward. This is, well, probably a few decades ago now.
Hmm.
Feeling very awkward because there was nothing to do, and doing nothing was totally unproductive, which was my inner context, right? My
Hmm.
belief system is, and we're raised with that we have to do all the time.
Yeah.
But what I began to realize is there are certain things that I need to do, and there's space in between the doing. Farmers learn to follow a rhythm in planting. You plant the seed, and there's things you do, and then there's things you don't do.
Hmm.
You got to let things gestate. You got to let things take root. You got to let things happen. Um, but in a doing culture like ours is, that's very hard for us to accept. Once you accept that, then you begin to learn to follow the rhythm of life. And the rhythm of life means doing something with my wife because she invited me to go for a walk. You
Hmm.
know, I can take a half an hour and go for a walk. And I can be present in that walk, knowing that when I go back, I don't have to be thinking about what I just did for a half an hour. I can just
Hmm.
walk and enjoy the scenery and talk about the day and connect with her. And then I go back and do something,
Yeah.
right? So it's finding how to live life with the rhythm of life. And I'll tell you, I'm constantly working on it. It's not an easy thing,
I think we all are.
but I want to emphasize it's definitely doable.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about our production level all the time. And, there's an old saying, stop and smell the roses, right? And, take your shoes off and walk on the grass and feel the grass. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And when you
Mhm.
find that, then balance in life becomes really simple, because we're living life. We're not producing and trying to now make time for it. I work probably 24/7, but I don't work 24/7. I'm
Mhm.
working all the time on my business. I work on Saturdays, I work on Sundays, but working might look like thinking about the next program I want to develop. And then I'm walking and I'm thinking about that, but I'm enjoying the scenery and I'm enjoying being with my wife. And I don't let that occupy me 100% of the time. I let it stew in the background. And then, and now I go up to the office and I do some work. So
Yeah.
it's finding that rhythm,
Yeah, it looks different for everyone,
and
but
it's going
finding
to
the
look
way
different for
to
everyone.
blend the two
And it's
in
going to look
harmony.
different for everyone, and it's going to look different for the same person at different times.
Absolutely. Yeah. And not not being stuck in the same context when a change is needed is going to be an important thing, because as life changes, as new responsibilities take shape, as your family grows, as your living environment changes, that context will need to shift as well.
Right. That's right.
So before we
I,
wrap,
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, go
No, go
ahead.
ahead.
I was just going to say that I remember when my son was born, I think I was 30 years old. And I was at HP and I was really big in the corporate world. And I, I don't want to say I resented him, but I didn't know what to do with him. I mean, it didn't fit my context. My life was geared about climbing the corporate ladder at that stage of my life. I have a very poor relationship with my son even to this day. His mother and I, my wife, separated when he was 2.5, and we never really developed a very close relationship. When my daughter was born, I was 54 and I had gone through a lot of changes in my life at that time. And I felt that she was a gift from God, the universe, whatever, to give me the opportunity to finally experience parenting.
Mm,
And I changed my whole context.
yeah.
And it was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. And again, I realized I mean, I was PTA president. I went on field trips. And it wasn't hard for me to find time because it was an important part of my life, including growing my consulting business, which I continue
Yeah.
to do and serve clients and all of that. It really comes to what's important and
Yeah.
being aware of where the ego's playing versus following what's really important.
That's so true. Thanks for being vulnerable and sharing that. I think
Yeah, you're
that's an
welcome.
important lesson for us all to think about. And as we wrap up here, Norman, for people listening, entrepreneurs listening who are in the early stages of
Hmm.
starting their business, what are the first steps they should take to align their business strategies with their personal values?
Um, be clear about why you're starting the business. If you're starting the business for what you might call the ego needs, which I'm not going to diminish by any means, because that's where we get a lot of our energy from.
Yeah.
Um, I had a friend who did his doctoral thesis on what makes entrepreneurs successful. And he discovered, besides the traditional 3 or 4 things, he said, key to it is there's an unmet psychological need, could be insecurity, could be a feeling of abandonment. They want to prove something, which pulls up a lot of energy to fulfill. So I don't want to diminish the ego needs, but also to the degree you want to make a difference in the world. You're starting your company because you see a need that wants to be solved and you're fully committed to that. Be clear about what that is. And then be clear about the other aspects of your life and realize that there's a way to do it all together in balance.
Mm.
There's ways to be totally focused on creating your business. Um, and there's also ways to be in relationship. I remember my son, who I mentioned earlier, um, he decided he was not going to get married or start a family until he was achieved a certain goal in his business. He wanted to be a venture capitalist. So he
Mm.
committed to that when he was about 21, 22. And he got his first seed round of money around 27. He got his first $1 million fund raised when he was about 30, 31. And he got married around 31, 32. And he did that consciously because he
Yeah.
knew, I mean, family was going to be important to him. And he knew he had to devote all of his energy to starting the business. So he created his environment to be focused when he needed to be focused, so that when he did get married and start his family, he knew he can bring the balance to that he wanted to bring as well. And he's
Mm.
run a very successful venture capital, one of the top venture capital firms in New York City. So
Wow. I really appreciate that as well, because it really illustrates that there's different ways to go about doing things, right?
Yeah,
And having the forethought, understanding what your values are in that season that you're in and what it's going to take to reach those goals, and making some sacrifices, but doing it in a conscious way so that when that season does end, you can reprioritize and
yep,
having the plan. It's a journey. You know where you want to go. The way you get there in between, there's going to be wrong turns. There's going to be lessons learned, people that help and guide you along the way. But the more you can put into motion and plan to help you get there, and realize that it's not going to be a straight line, you're going to find that that journey is a lot easier and more prosperous.
absolutely, absolutely.
Norman,
That's extremely well said, TJ.
well, thank you. And everything you've shared has been extremely well said. So I
Thank you.
appreciate you coming on and sharing all of this wisdom with us. For people that want to engage with you more, find more of your content, your book, work with you, what's the best place to tap in and get connected?
So our website is www.quantumleaders.com. I've made available to all podcast guests, listeners, um, to have first three chapters of the book for free. So
Thank you for that.
quantumleaders.com/podcast, and they can download the book or the first three chapters of the book for free. Of course, the book is on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and
Yeah.
it's on the ebook version through iBooks and whatever the platform is you want to use. Um, the Living Organization, Transforming Business to Create Extraordinary Results is the full title. But type in the Living Organization and it will come up. They
Mhm.
can also reach me at nwolfe@quantumleaders.com if they want to have a one-on-one conversation.
Awesome. Well, we're going to put links to everything in the show notes to make it easy to get to your website, find the book, get in contact with you, and anybody who is thinking about doing that, just go ahead and take action now. Reach out to Norman, get connected, because there's a lot of value to be had, and you got to take the first step and take action in anything that you're doing. So Norman, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time on a Friday to share with us your journey and a lot of really valuable wisdom. And I appreciate and I'm grateful for your time.
Thank you, TJ. It's been a pleasure and it's been fun having this conversation with you. Appreciate it.
To all of our Adventurous listeners, thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Please be sure to subscribe, download, and share this on social media or with someone you know will get some value from it. Leaving a review goes a long way in helping people find the show, and I personally appreciate reading them when they come in. So please go drop one if you have the time. We'll see you all next week, and remember, whether we're talking about business or the things that bring us joy outside of work, life is meant for exploring. So go out there and live it one adventure at a time.